Welcome to this explainer. We often think of ancient biblical history as this simple, clean story of a people completely devoted to one God. But the reality on the ground, and actually buried right there in the dirt, was far more complex and, frankly, filled with intense cultural clashes. Today, we're going to dive right in and map out exactly how pure worship collided with pagan idolatry in ancient Israel. Here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at an idol in the temple. Second, the altar versus the Asherah. Third, the danger of syncretism. Fourth, faces of Canaanite idolatry. And finally, God as King and Father. All right, Section 1, an idol in the temple. Let's start with a startling historical reality that kind of challenges everything we think we know about ancient biblical worship. We're going straight to the epicenter of ancient Israelite religion. In what can only be called the ultimate intrusion of faith, an idol of a pagan fertility goddess was once placed right inside the most sacred site in Jerusalem. When we picture the Holy Temple, we envision absolute purity, right? Strict monotheism. But historical sources tell us that at certain points, this sacred space was completely compromised. The ultimate intrusion wasn't an invading army breaking down the doors. It was actually a carved piece of wood brought right into the holy sanctuary. Just listen to this historical account from 2 Kings. It tells us that before King Josiah enacted his massive religious reforms, an Asherah actually stood right inside the house of the Lord, sharing space with the central altar. This text reveals exactly what Josiah was up against. The Asherah wasn't just tolerated out in the countryside, it had fully infiltrated the temple itself, sitting right alongside the site of pure worship, until it was literally dragged out to the Kidron Valley. Now, this was a huge deal because this placement directly violated a strict prohibition. The ancient text from Deuteronomy explicitly forbids planting any tree or wooden pole as an Asherah beside the altar of the Lord. Why? Well, because bringing an object of pagan fertility directly next to the altar of God forces this unnatural, forbidden relationship between two totally incompatible worldviews. The altar was meant to be entirely exclusive. Moving on to Section 2. The altar versus the Asherah. This really builds into a stark thematic contrast. We're essentially looking at a battle of symbols. Think about the altar of the Lord. It's fundamentally about purity. It's a structure commanded by God, designed solely for exclusive connection. Now compare that to the Asherah of man. It is the exact opposite. It's an artifact of impurity, a human-made wooden pole tied to nature cults and fertility. By trying to put the Asherah next to the altar, humanity was essentially introducing betrayal right into the very heart of their covenant. Section 3. The danger of syncretism. You see, the real issue here wasn't that people were just abandoning their faith entirely. It wasn't a simple swap of one religion for another. It was much more complicated and messy. It's all about syncretism, the confusing, dangerous blending of distinct religious systems. Understanding this is absolutely crucial to unlocking this entire historical conflict. The ancients often didn't want to stop worshiping God. They just kind of wanted to hedge their bets. They wanted the altar for their spiritual covenant, sure, but they also wanted the Asherah to ensure their crops grew and their flocks multiplied. But this syncretism creates a toxic religious confusion. It completely destroys the core requirement of biblical monotheism, which is absolute exclusivity. Let's look at Section 4, Faces of Canaanite Idolatry. Let's take a quick virtual museum tour to look at the physical artifacts of these ancient deities from places like Ugarit. Because these weren't just abstract ideas, right? These were physical objects that people held and prayed to. Take Baal, the storm god. If you walked into the Louvre or the Israel Museum today, you'd see Baal depicted in bronze figurines and reliefs as a fierce warrior. He's often holding a club, wielding a lightning bolt, or standing on a mountain. Ancient people were terrified of drought, so they turned to Baal. He was the localized answer to ancient man's desperation for rain and survival. Then you have Asherah, the earth and fertility goddess. While Baal was up in the sky bringing rain, Asherah was tied strictly to the soil receiving it. She was represented physically by wooden poles planted in the earth and associated with tree of life motifs. The archaeological record is absolutely full of these small, nude clay figurines, often called Ashtaroth figures, which emphasized earthly reproduction. When the biblical text talks about smashing idols and cutting down wooden poles, these physical objects, these local attempts to control nature, are exactly what they're talking about destroying. Finally, Section 5, God as King and Father. So to counter these local pagan fertility cults, the biblical text established a distinctly pure framework. It had to answer the needs of the people without resorting to idolatry. The ancients looked to Baal for power and Asherah for life, but the biblical texts counter this by combining both of those attributes into one exclusive god. Think about God as king, or Melech. That means supreme authority and ruler over the earth, bypassing any need for a storm god. And then God as father, or Av. That represents the ultimate creator and nurturer, completely eliminating the need for a localized fertility goddess. The big takeaway here is that by defining God simultaneously as a commanding king and a caring father, the text completely resolves the need for that dangerous syncretism we talked about earlier. This is true exclusivity. It combines authority and intimacy. When the ultimate authority of the universe is also your direct nurturer, the allure of that wooden Asherah pole next to the altar just vanishes. It leaves absolutely no empty space for a pagan deity to fill. So I want to leave you with this provocative thought. If ancient societies struggled so deeply with blending contradictory ideas, in what ways do we still attempt to mix incompatible truths in our modern world? We might not be planting wooden poles next to stone altars anymore, but that human instinct to hedge our bets and blend completely incompatible worldviews, well, it's pretty hardwired into our history. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope it brought these ancient stones and texts vividly to life for you.